9. Having announced that we would have the 10 quests of the campaign available on this floor completed by 5 o'clock on December 20th, just 40 hours from then, we returned to the Dark Elf camp base, delivered the item to the commander to finish the infiltration quest, and immediately left for our next mission. The 7th chapter, Butterfly Collection, was a brief breather of a quest that simply involved finding and defeating a giant butterfly released by the Forest Elves for reconnaissance. It would have been easier with a decent throwing knife skill, but I didn't have the open slot at this point, so we had to go racing after the butterfly in the night forest, picking up stones to throw at it. In the 8th chapter, The Western Spirit Tree, the Dark Elf commander had read and digested the top secret Forest Elf orders we brought back and was prepared to lead an attack on the Forest Elf base. He wanted to have the Jade Key secretly transported to their outpost on the 4th floor. Asuna, Kismil, and I, accompanied by 3 Dark Elf soldiers, headed to the Spirit Tree the elves used to travel between the floors. Of course, these transport missions never ended uneventfully, and we made our way towards the tree at the western edge of the forest. A mysterious band dressed in black ambushed us. Out of the 4 masked attackers labeled unknown marauders in the game, we handily dispatched 3. Both Asa and I were well over the expected level at this point, and we had services of the elite knight Kismel. But the 4th marauder threw a smoke bomb and stole the key from the confused elven soldier. Naturally, I knew this ambush was coming. I was ready to attempt defeating all 4 of them, but I was indeed unwinnable fight. The other 3 bodies immediately blackened and melted away, so there was no way to tell who they were. In the 9th quest, Pursuit, we had to chase the thief through the forest. In the beta, I remember the single quest lasting from morning until night. It took that long because finding Shining Signal, a small bottle of glowing liquid one of the elf soldiers hit their thief with, was incredibly hard in the midst of the deep forest. We started the 9th chapter after noon on the 19th, and I was prepared for it at last, as well into the night. To my surprise, though, at this point, I should have expected it, Kismel's help proved invaluable. She stood at the lead and immediately pointed out the direction of the glowing light at every turn, so we discovered the thief's hideout cave by 2 o'clock. The next step was to report to the commander, so we went back to the base for food and rest. And by the evening, we were ready for the 10th and final quest of the campaign on the 3rd floor. Retrieving the key. It was a difficult task that involved exploring a large dungeon. Though not as large as the labyrinth, this was too much to complete before the end of the day, especially since our day had begun well before dawn. So we had to turn back after defeating the enormous whip spider boss on the dungeon's 1st level. At 11 o'clock that night, we returned to the base and took our turns bathing. This time, Kismel decided to barge in during Asuna's turn. And sadly, there was no way to tell exactly what's happening beyond that tent flap based on our brief shrieks and splashes and occasional laughing. After a late dinner, we went to bed and woke up in the early morning of December 20th. After a quick tune-up at the blacksmith and some supply refills at the item shop, we briskly headed to conquer the 2nd floor of the large underground dungeon. Since we had returned to the camp, the extra soldier was no longer accompanying us. But it actually was easier to coordinate a high-level combat maneuvers with just the 3 of us. We powered our way through the insect and animal monsters, and finally came across the masked thief hideout at the bottom of the dungeon. We snuck up and peered through the window in their dining room-like space, spotting 5 more thieves without masks on. They weren't forest elves, and certainly not dark elves. They were an entirely different race with dark purple skin, as though rotting away, somehow demonic features. The information on their cursors identified them as fallen elf warriors. Kismel looked nervous, but there wasn't time to stop and ask her about it. We proceeded onward and won several inescapable battles, finally arriving at the final boss of the dungeon and quest, the Fallen Elf commander. He was a difficult foe, with a number of minions, but with our levels at a realistic limit on this floor, he posed no true threat to us. When Asana's chivalric rapier delivered the killing blow, the commander hurled a final curse at us and melted away. At the back end of the room was a mountain of treasure, along with the jade key. This time, we managed to transport the key all the way to the spirit tree, signaling the end, at least on the 3rd floor, but of the long campaign. But just as Asa and I were about to high-five each other on the job well done, Kismel interrupted with a surprising statement. "Asana and Kirito," she said slowly and carefully, the light playing over her beautiful purple hair. "Now that it's clear that the Fallen Elves are in league with the Forest Elves, we must deliver this key to the forest in the next floor above with haste. I believe that this task will fall upon me to complete." "Huh?" Asana's eyes went wide, and she took a step forward. Her face had a nervous smile of one of those who suspected what was coming. "Then we'll go with you, just in case there's another ambush." "Thank you, Asana. Your offer is very kind." Kismel stopped there. She moved over to Asana's side and looked upward. We were close to the outer perimeter of Aincrad, and the pure blue expanse stretched out before us. The knocked trunk of the spirit tree stood in the stark contrast of the cobalt sky behind it. Near the roots of the 15-foot wide tree was a large, gaping knot that led to its hollowed interior. But unlike the trees of Zimfoot, this was not carved out by human hands. In the darkness within the hole, the blue light pulsed. Around the tree, mossy rocks formed a solid wall, and only the gate that accessed the tree was guarded by a quartet of dark elf sentries. This tree was a teleporter for the elves, and the forest elves had their own on the other side. As you might expect, there was much debate during the beta regarding whether or not these trees could be used to bypass the labyrinth. One guild even pulled together a 30-man raid party to assault the tree, but the 4 guards easily squashed the attempt. My guess was that even if they'd succeeded, nothing would happen inside the tree. As she stared up at the tree, Kismel's next statement confirmed that months-old expectation. "Sadly, only the people of Lysula are permitted to pass through the spirit tree's gate." Asana was expecting this. After several long moments of silence, she nodded. "I see." "Yes," Kismel returned solemnly. The elf shut her lips tight for a while, then turned and circled her arms around Asana's back. The fencer's eyes widened briefly in surprise, but she returned the knight's embrace just as quickly. With her mouth right at Asana's ear, Kismel whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "After I lost my sister a month ago, I was waiting to find my place to die. When I crossed blades with the White Knight of Kelo, I thought I was going to see my sister again. But you and Kirito appeared and saved me. She must have guided you to my side." I didn't know that till now the herbalist had ever really existed in Aincrad. There was no way to know if the Dark Elves and the Forest Elves had really carried out major battles. If there were no players around to see it, those memories, including Tilnell, might have simply been implanted into Kismel's programming as a story background, a backbone to her character. But I could have sworn I saw a pale shimmer in the air beside Kismel and Asana. Perhaps it was just the light engine shining through the branches on the spirit tree? Or perhaps... "We'll see you again, won't we?" Asana murmured into Kismel's hair. The elf nodded vigorously. "Absolutely. The holy tree will guide us together." She squeezed harder and then released her hold. Kismel shared one last smile with Asana before looking at me. I was expecting a handshake, perhaps a high five, but Kismel strode forward with no hesitation and enveloped me into her arms as well. The cool, smooth metal of her armor and fresh, piney scent made me feel like I was deep in a forest. "The next time we meet, Kirito, I will tell you more of my dreams," she whispered. I put my hands on her back. "Yeah, Sounds good. It's a promise, then. And with a last squeeze of her arms, Kismel let go. She took a step back, then another, and raised her right fist to her left breast in salute. Asa and I automatically returned it. And now, this is farewell. I am sorry not to accompany you to the Pillar of Heavens, but I believe that you have the skill to dispatch its guardians. Be done with them and ascend. I will be waiting for you on the 4th floor. Take care, Kismel, Asuna said. The knight smiled, then spun on her heel, long cloak flapping, and she strode off to the gate. The guard stepped aside, she passed through, and then closed behind her. Kismel stepped through the knothole in the spear tree without a backwards glance, and disappeared into its darkness. A few seconds later, the faint blue light flashed much brighter. On the left side of my vision, the 3rd HP bar that had been displayed for the past week vanished with a breezy jingle. In the end, the reward for completing the 3rd floor portion of the Elf War campaign did not contain anything useful for defeating the boss. When the commander back at the base thanked us for our service, the list of items we were able to choose from included a half-dozen pieces of gear. But no matter how many times I pored over their specs, effects, and flavor text, there wasn't a single word that suggested any particular connection to the floor boss. I ended up choosing a pair of leather boots, with extra resistance to tumbling and some extra jumping power, after having slipped during my duel with Morte. And Asuna picked out a new hooded cape made from the same material as Kismel's favorite cloak. The faint glowing pale purple cape gave a solid bonus to hiding and increased agility, though not to the extent of the original. Until this point, our interactions with the Dark Elf commander have been very perfunctory, absolutely NPC-like. When we had chosen our rewards, he rose from his chair, and with concern on his face, he said,
"We elves are long-lived, but we cannot hurt with blades as much as anyone else, and a deep enough wound will kill. We are not gifted with hardiness of the dwarves and humans. The Fallen Elves you fought in the underground maze are the descendants of those who sought to use the tree, magics to forge themselves bodies impervious to blades. This happened before the Great Separation, and they were banished for it. They are numerous throughout this castle, and their cooperation with the Forest Elves in search of the keys is troubling in the extreme. As the advance troop, we will remain here for now, surveying for traces of the fallen before returning to our fortress on the 4th floor. Your continued assistance will be greatly appreciated."
Asuna and I shared a brief look and nodded together. "We'd be happy to. Anything we can do."
"Good. Your help is a boon. I suspect the general at the fortress will treat you magnanimously. Take this commendation with you."
The commander picked a tightly rolled piece of parchment off his desk and offered it to me. We thanked him for this extra reward and prepared to leave when the commander spoke again.
"You are going to climb the Pillar of Heavens to the 4th floor."
Yes, that's the plan."
"In that case, be wary of the Guardian's beasts' poisonous attack. You ought to prepare yourselves with plenty of poison counteracting potions while you are in camp."
"Thank you very much for the advice," I said, bowing and leaving the tent. As soon as I ventured outside, a horn sounded, signaling the passage of noon. I took a dozen steps towards the inviting scent of the dining hall before looking over at Asuna. I'm not going to say I wasn't grateful for the advice, but now it's harder to say that the quest rewards helping with the boss wasn't true. Over the past day, I'd explained to Asuna about my riverside duel with the swordsman/axeman, Morte, and his suspicious activities. Morte had joined the Dragon Knights Brigade and was helping them with the campaign. That much had been confirmed by Argo, and it was also certainly true that he was moonlighting with the Einkrad Liberation Squad, using a different class of weapon. However, I suspected that Cabau's sudden interest in campaign and his firm belief that the rewards were crucial to defeating the boss were based on info Mort fed him. If that source was a total lie, I was hoping to use that fact to get Cabau's to fess up about where he learned it. And yet, none of the items we could earn for finishing the quest had any special effect against the floor boss. Since Cabau said the items you earned from the elf quest were necessary to avoid big trouble against the boss, then you could say that his information was a lie? Right, but if someone claimed that the hint about poison antidotes was the reward, it's a lot harder to write it off entirely. Asuna responded almost immediately, her quick wit in keeping with her agility first build. All you can do now is just explain the truth, and exactly as it happened at the meeting tonight. If we watch and Morte's reaction closely, maybe he'll give away something. At any rate, let's eat and take a break before we go. I hope they let us use Kismel's tent. Good point. Even if it was available to use now that the owner was away on the 4th floor, it would just be the two of us sleeping under the same canopy. I chose not to bring that up to Asuna and trotted after to the dining tent. Thankfully, when Asuna did not notice that the two of us would be sharing a tent alone, there was no fruit for her to throw. So I got a faceful of soft cushion instead. 5 in the evening. The second strategy meeting was about to begin in the meeting grounds of Zumfut. Lin's DKB and Cabau's ALS had finished mapping the labyrinth tower up to the boss chambers on the top floor. The DKB had just barely beaten them to the door for a second floor in a row. The MC for the strategy meeting and the leader of the raid would be Lind. What threw Asuna and me for a loop was Morte's absence from the meeting grounds. Perhaps he had changed his entire gear setup. In the safety of town, he could feel free to put it on weapons whose skills he didn't have, taken off his coif, and slipped among the crowd in a form I didn't recognize. But Asuna said that as far as she could tell, both guilds had the same lineup as the second floor boss battle. The meeting began with the schedule of tomorrow morning's battle, then moved into an actual strategy meeting. Argo had already released her strategy guide on the boss based upon the beta's test information. We split up the parties into separate roles. Once the questions and answers were out of the way, Lind asked me to speak. Naturally, he wanted me to report on the campaign quest rewards. I stood up and started off with a basic quest outline. When I reached the part about the Fallen Elves, the crowd started to stir. Some of them wanted more details about that, but I chose to keep it brief, knowing that Argo would soon be releasing the second volume of her Elf War Guide. First things first, nothing in the items themselves had any unique relations to the floor boss. However, after we received our loot, the elf commander gave us one piece of advice about the boss. The entire crowd was silent, not wanting to miss this information. He said, bring plenty of antidote pots, because the boss uses poison attacks. That's it. Now the silence turned awkward. It was such an obvious, basic piece of advice. Who wouldn't bring a stock of antidotes to a major fight? I cleared my throat and added a piece of information for the sake of Commander's honor. Just so you know, the boss in the beta test didn't have a crazy poison attack. Since that might be the thing that was altered in this fight, it's probably a good idea to bring as many potions as you can. I'll leave it up to Lind and Cabau to decide if this counts as quest reward crucial to defeating the boss or not. I sat back down, and the meeting grounds erupted into chatter. Some thought it was a letdown, and there was no secret weapon against the boss, while others claimed that this knowledge was far more useful than an item. Foremost among the latter opinion was Joe from the ALS, who screeched that if we had all tried the campaign now, we might learn something even more important. Once again, Cabal shut him with a single command, and when the group had quieted down, Lind rounded up the discussion with his ever-solidifying leadership. We will visit every item shop tonight, even on the lower floors, and produce more than enough potions for tomorrow. As planned, we will begin our operations at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Meet at the north gate of Zumfut. We will then travel to Diesel, the town closest to the labyrinth. After a short break, we will enter the tower. If all goes according to plan, we will defeat the boss by 2 in the afternoon. He paused and surveyed the 40-some members gathered from left to right, then raised a bracing call. Tomorrow night, we will celebrate in the main town of the 4th floor. Come on, everyone, let's win this fight! During the last meeting, I'd watched Lynn deliver a speech on stage and thought, you've got a long way to go to replace Diovel. But even if he did not become Diovel himself, Lynn had a role to play, and that was his and his alone. Something much more crucial than mine, as I kept running from the truly important things, a role that someone had to take on if we were actually going to reach that far off 100th floor. Meanwhile, some were trying to fulfill roles that no one ought to touch. Morte was attempting to get DKB and ALS to clash. The man in the black poncho had lured the Legend Braves into swindling other players. Whatever their intentions were, they were surely not stopped now. I had to continue playing my role so that I could deal with their future machinations. Even the outcast of the front runner could help in his own way. I joined the others in raising my right hand toward the flat expanse of rock and the steel of 100 yards above, and clutched my newfound determination deep within my chest. At 1:12 p.m. the next day, Wednesday, December 21st, 2022, Nereus, Evil Treant, the boss of the 3rd floor of Eincrad, was defeated by a 42-man raid built from 7 parties. The large tree monster liberally used wide area poison skills that hadn't been there in the beta, but our stock of antidotes did not run dry. As I expected, Asana's chivalric rapier easily outclassed any other weapon present in the damage, and the rest of the group was left in awe. The battle took 53 minutes, and the 2nd floor there were no fatalities. Morte, the Axe Warrior, was not among the raid.